I started running in 2020, mostly just as a way to get outside and do something during the COVID pandemic. And fast forward to this year, I've hit the milestone of having run over 10,000 kilometers since then. In that time, I ran a 250 marathon, a sub 1735K, and I learned a whole lot of stuff along the way. In this video, I'll share the 10 biggest things I learned after running 10,000 kilometers so that you can apply them and become a better runner. Let's get into it. So I'll start off with the type of run that's going to take up the vast majority of your mileage, and that's going to be easy runs. On the surface, easy runs are probably the most dead simple kind of run that you can do, but a lot of runners are neurotic and like to overthink and overcomplicate things, myself included. So there is a bit more to them than you might think, and it is important to know what actually matters and what you don't really need to care about on an easy run. I've spent the past few years experimenting with a bunch of different ways to approach easy runs, doing everything from running them super easy to pushing them a little bit harder, caring about pace, not caring about pace. There's been a ton of stuff that I've tried, and ultimately I've landed on, I think, two things that are pretty much all you need to worry about on easy runs. The first thing you want to keep in mind is that the main goal, in my opinion, of easy runs is going to be to make sure that you don't compromise the quality of your hard days and your key workouts each week. What this means is you need to figure out the right effort level for your easy runs so that you don't show up too tired to your workouts. And this is also going to really limit the chances of overtraining and getting an overuse injury. And that segues into my second point, which is that the only thing that really matters on easy runs is your perceived effort. The reason I say effort is the most important is because it's the most reliable indicator for how hard you're actually working. Heart rate is also a valid data point, but a lot of things can affect it, like the outside temperature, how much sleep you got last night, if you had caffeine before you run, etc. But all these things aren't related to how hard you're pushing, so it's not quite as reliable. If all you have for measuring your heart rate is your running watch on your wrist, then I wouldn't really trust that data anyways, because measuring heart rate on your wrist can be wildly inaccurate. So I would only really look at heart rate data in the first place if you have a separate heart rate monitor, like a chest strap or one that goes on your arm. And by far the least important thing for an easy run is going to be the specific pace that you're running at. This can vary a lot depending on the route that you're running and how much elevation it has, and also just how you're feeling on the day, because if you're feeling more tired or more fresh, that can just naturally affect the pace that you're going to run at the same effort level. If you aim to run your easy runs at an arbitrary pace, then on some days you're going to be pushing likely too hard because you're just trying to hit that pace and ignoring how your body's feeling. And if anything, it's on those days that you really want to make sure you don't run too hard. So to recap, run your easy runs by effort and by feel, and run them at an effort so that you can manage your overall training load and show up fresh on your workout days. All right, let's move on to number two. The second thing I learned is that while it's probably one of the hardest parts about running, there's no replacement for learning to really be in tune with your body and understand how you're actually feeling. Having this skill means that you'd be able to differentiate between an ache that's bothering you but is just a normal part of training versus something that is maybe the onset of a much more serious injury. The reason this is such a hard skill to develop is that it takes time and also the willingness to reflect and look inward. The only way to really develop the skill is to reflect on how you felt in the past, what led to injuries, what didn't, and kind of build up a mental bank of all the ways your body has felt. And over time, you'll really become in tune with how your body's feeling. When you are in tune with your body, you can scale back your training when you feel like you need it, and you'll avoid a lot of injuries this way. But the only way to really learn how to do this is to understand when too much is too much. For the third thing I learned, this one quote or saying really sums it up well, and that's that most people overestimate what they can do in a day, but underestimate what they can do in a year. That's another way of saying that I've learned in the sport of running, patience is absolutely a virtue. The runners that are going to be the most successful aren't the ones that are going at 110% for a few months. They're the ones that are just consistent for years and decades with just solid training. In your own training, this pretty much just means trusting the process over the long term and honestly just doing a lot of runs that are pretty boring. These are things like like your easy runs, threshold workouts, long runs. These are all honestly pretty repetitive and boring, but stacked over years will make all the difference. And so as an endurance athlete, I've learned that you need to have a long-term mindset and trust that the results will come in the future because of the work that you're putting in now. The fourth lesson I've learned over the years is that fueling and nutrition can absolutely make or break your running. There's enough to cover on this topic that it could easily be its own video, and I have actually made a separate video on this that you can watch after this one. But for this video, I'm just gonna split it and focus on two things. The first point is gonna be for what you eat outside of your actual runs throughout the week. Running uses up a lot of energy, and the more you run each week, the more you're gonna need to eat to replenish all that energy you've lost. So your number one priority should be to eat enough first and foremost, and only then, if you have the ability to, can you focus on eating healthy. If you don't eat enough or underfuel for a prolonged period of time, then you're gonna put yourself at a risk of developing RED-S, or relative energy deficiency in sport. And the more you run each week, the higher your risk of developing this is gonna be. I had a brief period this year where I had some RED-S-like symptoms, and honestly, it's not a place you wanna end up because you just feel absolutely terrible. Holy shit. I feel terrible. And in my case, I wasn't even intentionally eating too little. I just wasn't really aware of how much I was actually supposed to be eating. And turns out it's quite a lot. I like to use the analogy of a furnace because a furnace doesn't really care what you're throwing into it so long as you're throwing something into it to keep it burning. And that's pretty much the mindset you want to have as an endurance athlete when it comes to fueling throughout the week. The second point is for fueling during your runs, although this is mostly going to apply to marathons and long runs in training. If we're talking about marathons specifically, from everything I've seen and read online and also just experienced myself, there seems to be an almost linear increase in performance as you increase the number of carbs per hour that you're taking in on average during the marathon. This was really pioneered in cycling first, but nowadays it's not that unusual to see elite runners taking upwards of 100 grams of carbs per hour in their marathons. Historically, the recommendation was to aim for about 50 to 60 grams of carbs per hour at most, but once we discovered that the body has different mechanisms for absorbing glucose and fructose, then it turns out that you can absorb much more carbs per hour than that. I'd say a good minimum to aim for in a marathon is to take your body weight in kilograms and try to get in at least that many grams of carbs per hour on average. So for example, if you weigh 75 kilos, then you'd want to aim for at least 75 grams of carbs per hour on average. That being said though, it's good to try and push that intake even higher because this can help your marathon performance in a pretty significant way. So I'd recommend trying to go even higher until you hit a carb intake that you feel like is around the maximum that you're able to do. Editor Albert here. Just a quick break in the video to tell you about this video's sponsor, me. If you're someone that wants to improve their running and you like what you're seeing in this video, then I'd love to help you out through one-on-one coaching. If you're interested, you can send me an email here or send me a message on Instagram. All right, now let's get back to the video. All right, so for the fifth lesson I learned, it's kind of an extension of one of the things I said for the first lesson I learned, but it's that actually the vast majority of your training should be done by feel. For almost any type of run, whether it's an easy run, a tempo run, a threshold workout, even a VO2 max workout, the whole point is to put your body in a certain physiological state in order to get the right stimulus from that type of run. So for a tempo run, you might want to sit just under your LT1 or first lactate threshold. For a threshold workout, you might want to sit just under your LT2 or second lactate threshold. And for a VO2 max workout, you want to be right at that spot where you're intaking your maximal oxygen intake or your VO2 max. The pace that you run at these effort levels can be influenced by a whole bunch of things, including the route that you're running, how fresh or tired you're feeling that day, whether there's wind or headwind, tailwind. A whole bunch of stuff can influence the pace you're running, but ultimately it's the effort that actually matters. That all being said though, there are actually a few exceptions when running by pace does actually make sense. The first case is going to be on the track and when you're running shorter reps. So for example, if you're doing something like 200 meter repeats or even 400 meter repeats, you're going to spend a good portion of each rep feeling relatively good because your body is working up to the effort level it needs to actually be at. So because the track is so consistent and uniform, it can make sense to base your workout off of pace. especially if the reps are short enough that your body doesn't really have enough time to even get up to the right effort level. The other scenario where running by pace makes sense is when you're about 4 to 6 weeks out from your key goal race and you want to run at your goal race pace. Running by effort is great, but if you have a specific time goal for your race, then after doing the majority of your training, at some point you need to check whether that pace is actually realistic. There are different workouts you can do for this depending on the distance. For example, for a 5K, you could do 6 times 1K at your goal 5K pace, or for a marathon, it could be something like 3 by 10K at marathon pace, or something like 20 to 25K straight at marathon pace. Basically, these workouts are a bit of a reality check before your race. So if you're not able to finish this type of workout at your goal pace, or maybe just barely squeak by, but it was absolutely brutal, then that could be a sign that your goal pace is a bit too ambitious. But if the workout was hard, but you made it through, then you're probably in a good place for your race. And on the flip side, if it felt quite comfortable or maybe not that hard at all, then your goal pace might actually not be ambitious enough, and you can actually probably go faster than you think. But for pretty much everything else except those few special cases, training by feel is absolutely the way to go. Okay, moving on to the 6th lesson, and that's that, unfortunately, injuries are just a part of running. You can do absolutely everything right and still end up injured, but also a lot of the time, a lot of us are making tons of mistakes that we're not aware of, and that'll also eventually lead to an injury. Of course, being injured sucks, but every injury that you have is an opportunity to learn and also to bounce back even stronger. If you have an injury that's preventing you from running as much as you normally would, then I'd always recommend working with a running specific physiotherapist, because they can take a look at your injury and let you know what caused it so that you can prevent getting it in the future again. And also they can let you know what the best way to rehab it is so that you bounce back in the best way possible. Like I mentioned earlier, patience is a virtue in running, and nothing will test your patience more than some of the injuries you might get. So it's important to work back up to your normal training volume in a gradual way, and there's really no rush to get back into it, because there's nothing worse than just going back into normal training too early and re-aggravating your injury, which will just set you back potentially to where you started. A good physio will be able to advise you on what your return to running should look like, and also some tests you can do to make sure that you're actually able to handle more intense running or longer periods of running before actually jumping in and doing those runs. Okay, lesson number 7 is something I actually beat myself up over a little bit for a while, until I realized it's really just like any other skill that you have to practice. And I'm talking about pacing yourself in races. You'll hear people say things all the time like, oh, you want to start off conservative in a race and then do a negative split by running the second half a little bit faster than your first half and all that sort of stuff. But pulling that off actually isn't as easy as it might sound. A good example of this is most people, when they run their first marathon, don't really have an intuitive sense for how long of a distance it is. So when they feel really fresh and good at the start, they set off way too fast because they feel good. But then inevitably things are gonna fall apart towards the end because you wasted far too much energy in the beginning when you really should have been saving it for that final quarter of the marathon or so. The thing is though, it's totally normal to have pretty bad pacing when you're racing a distance for the first time ever. In my first marathon, I did that exact thing. I started off way too fast in the first half, and then both my legs cramped up really badly around the 35K mark, and I was pretty much limping into the finish for that final 7K or so. But for my second marathon, I understood because of my first marathon that I had to start off a lot more conservatively. Now, I ended up starting still a little bit too fast, but it went a lot better, and I actually ran that whole marathon without stopping even once. My third marathon was the first time that I'd ever actually pulled off a negative split before, and my fourth marathon featured almost identical first and second half splits. So that was by far the most evenly paced marathon I've ever ran. So I think it's safe to say that the more marathons I've done, the better I've gotten at pacing them. That being said though, just because you know how to pace a marathon doesn't mean you necessarily know the best way to pace a 5K, because that's a completely different distance and a completely different beast. So the lesson here is that each distance has its own challenges, and you'll get better at pacing each distance the more you race it. All right, we're in the home stretch now, and lesson number 8 has to do with mileage. So if you're someone that wants to increase their mileage and run really high mileage specifically, then in my experience, it's something that will take a bit of time to actually build up. There's a bit of a sneaky thing that happens when you first start running, where your fitness and aerobic fitness is going to improve much faster than your body's ability to tolerate the load that you're placing on it by doing the actual running itself. In just a few months of consistent running, your aerobic fitness can improve by quite a lot, but your body's bones, joints, and tendons can take much longer than that in order to adapt and be able to handle more load and more running. If you run too much and place more load on your body than it's ready to handle, then that's exactly how you get injured. So it's good to know that if you want to eventually be able to run 100K a week or even 100 miles a week or more, then it's going to take time to get there, and the build up to that should be quite gradual, and it'll take years. Pretty much no runner on the planet that consistently runs 100 miles or 160K per week started off running that much. They needed years to build up their tolerance to the pounding that running does to your body, and eventually after years of consistent training, you can maybe get up to mileage that's that high. So my advice here would be, once you've been running for a couple of years consistently already, then you can expect to increase your yearly mileage by about 10% per year at most, and therefore also your average weekly mileage by 10% per year. So really the lesson here is just to understand that building up your mileage is going to take some time. Don't do sudden spikes in mileage from one week to the next, especially if you're hitting a new weekly mileage that you've never hit before, and just be patient with it. I think patience is a key theme throughout all of these, it seems like. I'm just going to stay here because I've kind of run out of spots to film in, but bear with me, we're almost at the end here. So lesson number 9 that I learned has to do with the relationship between the volume and intensity of running that you do. One really important principle to keep in mind is that you should never significantly increase your volume and intensity of training at the same time. So for example, you don't want to go from 50 to 70K in a week, and also in that 70K week, add in a really tough workout that you've never done before, because that's just a massive increase in the amount of load you're putting on your body, and that's a recipe for getting injured. I made this exact mistake when I was training for my second marathon, when I went from running 80 something K per week to running my first ever 100K week. And in that 100K week, I did a really intense hill repeats workout and also my hardest long run of the entire training block. And surprise, surprise, I got injured not too long after that. I got a foot injury from that really sharp increase in volume and intensity, and somehow I was able to finish the rest of my training block and even run the whole marathon itself. But towards the end of the marathon, my foot injury really flared up, and after the race, I had to take months off of running. So it's just not worth it. Now, while it is possible to increase both volume and intensity at the same time, be very cautious with it and make these changes really, really small. But the best thing you can do if you want to increase your volume or your mileage is to do that through volume of easy running. So just run a bit more easy kilometers or miles each week. And only once you're confident your body can handle a specific mileage, then you can also start to increase the volume that you do in your actual workouts. If you want to increase the intensity of your workouts, then the bare minimum you should do is keep your weekly mileage the same, and even better would be to reduce it slightly just to be extra safe. And if you're wondering which of these two you should increase first, whether that's volume or intensity, it's better and safer to increase your volume first, because this will improve the capacity of work that your body is able to handle, and this will lend itself nicely to higher intensity running. And that brings us to the last lesson I've learned, lesson number 10, which is that consistency in running beats absolutely everything else. You don't need to have absolutely heroic workouts or run yourself into the ground in order to become a great runner. All you have to do is stack years of just decent and solid training, and in a few years you'll look back and be in a place that you never thought you could have gotten to just a few years ago. Just to really drive this point home, here's an analogy that I like to think about, which really helps with understanding why consistency is the way to go. So let's imagine that we have two different runners. Runner A is a runner that's constantly at their limit or even pushing past it, and because of that, they're constantly injured and having to take time off running. Runner B, on the other hand, is a runner that safely stays under the maximum limit of what their body can handle, and because of that, they're able to stay healthy and run pretty much year round. If we plot some kind of measure of fitness over time, then what we're gonna see with runner A is their fitness is gonna go up very quickly because they're pushing themselves hard, and their fitness is gonna go up quickly as a result. But every time they push too hard and get injured, they're gonna lose a significant chunk of that fitness that they've built up, more so the more serious their injury is. While runner A is stuck in this cycle of increasing their fitness and then getting injured and losing a lot of that fitness that they've built up, Runner B is increasing their fitness a lot more slowly, but also a lot more consistently. So over the long term, we can actually expect Runner B's fitness to end up being higher than Runner A's fitness. And that style of training is gonna have them feeling a lot better during training as well. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope these lessons were helpful and that you learned something from them. If you'd like to further improve your running, then check the description down below to find out how you can work with me as a running coach. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.